What's up, guys? Welcome to Mass Effect Talks. Today I'm going to be talking about the ancient races. I've been wanting to get to this episode for a while now because I don't know that much about the ancient races. And actually there's not that much information on the ancient races, but I just find them really interesting. We did get to know a little bit more about the ancient races in Mass Effect 3 from Javik. From conversations that you have with him, he does mention a lot of ancient races. So I'm going to be talking about the identified races. And by identified, I mean that people actually know the name of the race, and they know a little bit more about them. Javik talked about them, that kind of thing. And the unidentified races will come afterwards. Those are the ones that they don't even know what the name of the race was. They actually just refer to them from the planet that they were discovered on. The first few are going to be races that were around when the Protheans were around. I think the only importance when it comes to that is what Javik said in Mass Effect 3, that the Prothean Empire was not just consisting of the race, the Protheans, but Protheans were more of like a nationality kind of thing, where it's like, it doesn't matter if you're not a Prothean by race, but you are considered a Prothean because you're part of the Empire. But that was all up to them. Javik says, you were given a choice to be part of the Prothean Empire or not. I don't think it gives specifics as to which ones were part of Prothean Empire and which ones weren't, or which ones went against the Prothean Empire. But yeah, these first few were around when the Protheans were around. The Densoran once fought a war. I don't know when. A lot of this information is unknown, that's the only downside. But there is an upside to that. I'll go into that after I'm done talking about the identified races. The Densoran were once in a war against I don't know how to pronounce this. I don't know if Javik mentioned this race. He might have. I didn't go back to see how he pronounced it. But Oravores, these guys, Densoran were in war with them. How long? I don't know. But when the Reapers invaded during the Prothean reign, the Densoran actually sacrificed their children to the Reapers to try to pacify them. Now, the Reapers, we know from Mass Effect 3 and from previous Mass Effect games, the Reapers tend to brainwash people, or at least try to brainwash people. They try to make them think like it's a good thing to join them. Like, it's like, you will be saved if you join us, and you won't die, we will preserve you, and blah, blah, blah. And the Densoran believed that if they sacrificed their children, that it would pacify the Reapers and they wouldn't kill them. But this actually killed them off faster, the Densoran. They studied celestial mechanics. Celestial is anything pertaining to the sky or like outer space when studied through astronomy. They probably studied like things relating to outer space and maybe even space travel. They studied morphological simulations of galactic language, which I think means that they could mime different languages, that they could imitate them, because simulations is like an imitation. Morphological is being able to change in some ways. So I think they were able to mime different galactic languages, which is pretty interesting to me because I love anything that has to do with linguistics. And it says that these topics were beyond the understanding even of the Protheans, so they were pretty advanced when it came to this stuff. Now for the next race is the one that I was talking about, the one that I don't know how to pronounce. Oravores. This race is really interesting because, like I said, they existed during the time of the Protheans. They were spacefaring. They actually attacked Thessia, the homeworld of the Asari, in order to take control of the vast resources that Thessia has. But the Protheans stopped them. But this all went down in Asari mythology as it being referred to as the goddess of Thyhan, the Protheans. So this was all explained in Mass Effect 3 when Liara is looking on Thessia, when she's looking at all the things that were from the goddess Athame in the shrine or whatever that was, the temple, I think it was. So Asari mythology says that the goddess Athame was the one that saved them, that wielded her sword and saved them from danger, which was from these Oravores, or these guys, Oravores, from controlling Thyhan, from taking over the Asari. But we now know that the goddess Athame was not the goddess Athame, was not an Asari, but was the Protheans, were the Protheans. The next race was also mentioned by Javik, and this is also a very interesting race to me. They're called the Zatil. The Zatil were a synthetic race. They originated from a race known as the Za. What they did was they implanted themselves with a symbiotic AI technology. What symbiotic means is getting two different organisms and bringing them together. It was becoming inhospitable in their homeworld, so they implanted themselves with this AI in order to, because they thought it would make them more intelligent and they would be able to survive. So when the Reapers arrived, they subjugated the AIs. The AIs that were implanted in the Za, I guess, like hacked into them and then seized control of the body of the actual Za. After they seized their body, they changed the genetic code of the Za and created them into these monsters. We know of a few races that the Reapers have genetically changed and actually used as a race, and not just as cannon fodder like the Reapers, like the husks and all that. One of those races were the Protheans, that they changed the genetic code to make the collectors, and another one are the keepers on the Citadel. They also changed the genetic code in order to serve them better. And the offspring were turned into slaves. So it sounds like what happened to the Za was kind of like what happened to the Protheans and the collectors, because what they did with these new Zatil monsters, they multiplied them into mechanical swarms. There were so many of these mechanical swarms that they actually blotted out the sky. So the only solution that the Protheans could think of, the quickest solution, was sending the star from in the Za's home system, just supernova, making it go supernova so that it could destroy that whole system. The next race is a race that I'm sure you guys know about. It's probably the one ancient race that is most talked about when it comes to Mass Effect, besides Leviathan and besides the Protheans, that we actually know what they look like. Like, we've actually seen them, or representations of them. And that is the Inusannon. And we find out in Mass Effect 3 from Javik that the Inusannon are most likely those statues that we saw on Ilos in Mass Effect 1. Now, BioWare has already said this, that those statues on Ilos were meant to be the Protheans. They were meant to be the Protheans. And that's what we all thought in Mass Effect 1. That's who they were. But since they made them look so weird and so crazy with these tentacles, and they have like long tentacle fingers, and they're pretty much made out of tentacles, it was really hard for BioWare to make them a character that was actually walking around with you. What BioWare has always said when it comes to the way that each race looks, they have a template biped figure. So every race that is going to be like on your squad, because that's the most practical thing. I mean, you could say, oh well, the Hanar isn't biped. It's like this floating jellyfish, but we don't have any Hanar on our team. We don't have any like main Hanar characters. They're not going to be constantly coming out or constantly having to be animated and all that. So they have a template that's simple to work with, to animate. And that's a biped figure that is pretty humanoid in figure, but everything else is different. So they were going to have to do that with the Protheans, and they had in mind Javik, because they were like, we want Javik to be on your team. So they were going to have to be animating Javik. constantly, and you were going to be seeing him a lot, and he was going to be fighting with you. So the original concept of the Protheans, which were the statues on Ilos, it didn't really work for them. They were like, shoot. They kind of put themselves in a corner with the way that they made them look. So what they did was they were like, you know what? Let's just make them another race. They were somebody else. It wasn't the Protheans. They thought it was the Protheans, but it wasn't. So Javik comes out and says, no, those were the Inusannon. I loved how they looked like, those statues. And, I mean, if they didn't look so, like, those big, huge, long fingers and all that, I think they would have been cool if it just had the tentacles coming down. They would have looked like, from Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones. It would have looked something like Davy Jones, I think. Kind of like that. And I think that would have been awesome. I could understand from a animator's point of view, it probably was going to be very impractical. I believe that Inusannon weren't around during Prothean time. They were in war against another race called the Thyhan. They fought against the colonization rights of this garden world, Angana. The Inusannon were eventually wiped out by the Reapers. The Protheans actually got a lot of their knowledge from the Inusannon, especially Mass Effect technology. This was tens of thousands of years later, after the Inusannon, when the Protheans discovered the civilization of the Inusannon, what was left of it, the ruins. I think the ruins on Ilos. The fight for Angana, its environment is energetic and aggressive. And energetic, by energetic, I don't mean like, ooh, freaking Red Bull, woohoo. I mean like element 0, like a lot of it there. You could probably survive in like specific suits and stuff like that. But I don't think we ever went to Angana. I don't remember. I don't think we did. But we did read about it. I think in the Codex or something. It's littered with the ships. This is interesting to me. The ships of the Inusannon and the Thyhan, the other race that they were fighting against. It would have been so cool if you would have been able to go on Angana and see this. That would have been so awesome. I mean, just to see these types of ships. Like, I mean, these are ancient races. Like, what did their ships look like? And that's pretty much what polluted and intoxicated the air, was the Mass Effect drive cores of these ships that broke apart, dumping refined element 0 over large stretches of landscape. And a wave of extinctions followed. Any living organism that remained developed biotic powers because of the element 0. The next race are the Thyhan, but pretty much what we know about the Thyhan is exactly what I just said when it comes to Inusannon, that they were in war with them, and that their ships litter the landscape of Angana and its moon, and that this all took place about 127,000 years ago. The race after that is another hard to pronounce, Zaof. They were an ancient spacefaring race that built millions of elaborate crypts on the surface of the planet Armeni. Nobody knows about this race because the Citadel Council has made it prohibited by law to excavate any of these crypts, which is, yes, these crypts. They consider these crypts as sacrosanct, which makes sense. I mean, yeah, you want to respect that, but I mean, you're completely throwing away a race here, and it's like, come on, like, why can't you just at least study them and know who they were and like what the hell happened there, and
Yes, the Zaof. We have dismissed those claims.
I'll bet you did. And the last identified race are the Arthan. They lived in multiple worlds in the Zelene system 300,000 years ago. Their homeworld appears to be Halim. It's considered to be a dead planet where complex life used to live. And it was destroyed by an unknown cataclysm. Things like that always like make me go, ooh, I want to know more. I want to know what happened. Debris from the Artheni technology was equal to, in Mass Effect terms, was equal to the galactic state of the art. So they were pretty advanced for 300,000 years ago. The leading theory of the devastation on the homeworld of the Arthan is an out-of-control biological weapon. They believe this because the Helim, they kind of treat it like a quarantine zone. So, landing is prohibited. There are other identified races that Javik mentions, but that's pretty much all he does. He just mentions them. We don't know anything else about them. We just know the name of the race. These were several spacefaring races who existed at the time of the Prothean Empire, 50,000 years ago. So, they are the Ditakor, wiped out the Sinril. This is where he says, like, this person wiped out this person, and this person wiped out that person. The Indoromi conquered the Vandomar, and the Sindril claimed to have found the path of eternal peace, but were wiped out by the Ditakor, and the Vandomar were conquered by the Indoromi. Now for the unidentified races. These unidentified races were either mentioned in the video game or were also in the Cerberus network. Like every now and then, the Cerberus network would put out like a little piece of information, or like it was like a news article almost, and it was talking about different races or different species that were being discovered, but they didn't know what it was called. They haven't named them anything or anything like that, but they are ancients. And they're referred to by the name of the planet that they were found on. For the unidentified races, there's quite a few, and a lot of them, there's really not that much information for them. So I'm probably just going to show a few on the screen. The ones that there's not that much information, and I'm just going to be talking about the ones that I find the most interesting. Mnemosyne, I'm sure that rings a bell. That was where the Duralech Reaper was orbiting. Cerberus estimates that about 37 million years ago, this Reaper, the Duralech Reaper that we find in Mass Effect 2, that we board in Mass Effect 2, that this Duralech Reaper was disabled by an accelerator round fired by a weapon. They don't know who created this weapon or who these things were. Who shot it down? And that's what I've wanted to know. Who shot it down? I wish they would have gone into that a little bit in Mass Effect 3. Just a little bit. But they didn't. So I don't know. But I find that very interesting. It's something that they probably should have addressed. Just because it seems like a very important piece of data, but I guess, how would they even know? I wonder if Mnemosyne is habitable. No way. Woo. Surface temp 1,500 C. No. Approximately 37 Jupiter masses. Wow. Whoever killed that Reaper was not on Mnemosyne. The next one is Namakli. I'm sure that one rings a bell as well. We went to Namakli in the DLC Leviathan. On the rocks, there are paintings of this anthropoidal, of this humanoid type of race that are worshipping the Leviathans. They were a slave race, and they were the enthralls of the first Reapers. When the Leviathans created the AI, the Catalyst, and therefore the Reapers enslaved the Namakli, or these humanoid people, enslaved them and used them as Reaper agents to take down the Leviathans. This one is probably one of my favorites out of the unidentified, just because of imagining how this race must have looked. Whatever was left of this race was found on the planet Afras, and it's known to once have been inhabited by a sapient terrestrial Avian race. Okay, let's analyze this a little bit. Sapient means intelligent or relating to humans, like Homo sapiens. Terrestrial, Avian race. What I was imagining, I don't know if you guys know what I'm even talking about, but for those of you that have played Final Fantasy XI, the MMO, do you remember those birds. What were they called? The gurus or what? What were they called? And no, I'm not talking about the chocobos. It started with a Y. I'll bet you anything. It started with a Y. Yagudu. That's what I imagine. I'm gonna put a picture of it. That's what I imagine, and I don't know. I've always loved that idea of an avian terrestrial race, like biped walking around with wings and stuff. Like, another one that I liked, that I found interesting, was from the planet Selene. This race that they discovered didn't enter this system. This is the Phi Cleo system. Didn't enter the system through a mass relay. They actually entered the system through independent FTL. And I mean, is that like, okay, so I mean, if you think about it, that's pretty interesting. I'm gonna go into why this is interesting later, but I don't know. Even on itself, that's like, wow, that was a lot of traveling to get to a system without a mass relay. Next is from the planet Etimis. On the surface of Etimis, there is evidence that it was bombarded by dreadnought-class kinetic weapons. And there was relics found on Etimis that show an advanced spacefaring race lived there 20 to 40 million years ago. This could be evidence of Reaper attacks. So maybe Etimis, I mean, they were an advanced spacefaring race, which is the exact thing that Reapers look for, advanced spacefaring races. So maybe the Etimis were one of many races that the Reapers destroyed. I mean, for it to be bombarded by dreadnought-class kinetic weapons. And the last one is on the planet Junthor. Junthor was once a colony of an ancient spacefaring race. This was interesting because it has a reference of the Forbidden Planet, the sci-fi movie. This was on Mass Effect 1. It was a collection of UNC Asari writings, matriarchs writings. They found a pillar in the center of the ruins that was covered in inscriptions. And when the Asari translated it, they found the words, "Walk among these works and know our greatness." And another pillar said, "Monsters from the id." Why BioWare chose to do this, I don't know if it was just to reference Forbidden Planet, or maybe they also wanted to reference something about this race that was tied to what happened in Forbidden Planet. And the id is part of the human psyche, according to Sigmund Freud. The movie is about an ancient civilization with this crazy power, like unimaginable power. And they pretty much they gave birth to monsters of their own psyche, and they eventually wiped themselves out. This is probably what happened on Junthor. And I'm thinking, since this is Mass Effect, and pretty much a big theme in Mass Effect, especially in Mass Effect 3, is that synthetics eventually take over or destroy organics. So maybe the Junthor, or the race on Junthor, created synthetics, and these monsters that they created eventually killed them. This is probably me just like wishing this would happen and like getting all nerdy and everything. But imagine it. We know that BioWare is going to be doing another Mass Effect game. We've known this ever since before the release of Mass Effect 3. BioWare had already announced in 2011 that they were going to continue the Mass Effect series, but that the Shepard story was over. It was just a trilogy, no more Shepard after Mass Effect 3. If they do a Mass Effect that comes after Mass Effect 3, doesn't matter how many years or anything, they're going to have to come up with a canon ending, or they're going to have to do something where they have to look at what the endings were in Mass Effect 3, because these were huge changes. Whatever ending you chose, it would drastically change the galaxy. So what I think is more possible is for them to do a prequel. And I don't mean like a prequel like the First Contact Wars or something like that. Now, this is not what I want, obviously. I would love something in the future. I would want to know what happens years after, even if they do choose a canon ending. What the freaking hell ever. I don't care. I don't care. What I want to know is the future. Like, I want to see more technology. I want to know where it takes them. I want to see the races that are currently there. Like, what happened to the Turians? What happened to the Asari? What happened to the Krogan? All that. But BioWare could also, in order to prevent the whole canon ending, they could do before Mass Effect, before the trilogy. They could go way in the past, like years before, and go into the ancients. So the camera that I was just using died on me. It ran out of battery. But so yeah, here I am using this now. Imagine if BioWare uses these ancient races for a Mass Effect game that takes place like in the past. That, I mean, this is probably like a long shot. Like, it's probably never gonna happen. But that would be so cool, like, to see new races. I mean, I would miss the races that are there, obviously, like no Turians, no Krogans, or having them being primitive would be weird. But it would also, I don't know, open a new door for some new stories and some stuff that we don't know about, because we don't know anything about this. And anything in the near past to the trilogy would be like, oh, well, we already know that the big threat are the Reapers. So it's like, we know what happened in the First Contact Wars, blah, blah, blah. It's probably still would be interesting to play. I obviously would play it. But I prefer to see something in the distant future. And it would also be interesting to see something in the distant past. Because, I mean, could you imagine, like, those Avian, like a race of, like, bipedal Avian? Dude, that would be so cool. I was like, well, you always have to have a character or a species that looks human. Or at least you want to, so that there's something that you could kind of, so that the player has something that you could relate to. That's a little closer to home. There were, like 2 or 3 races that were humanoid or primate-like. Like I said, it's a long shot, and they probably would never do that. But it just made me think about that. I was like, oh, that would be so cool, like, to just delve into this realm that we know nothing about, with these ancient races. It could spark some really awesome stories. If there were a way to incorporate the species that are existent now, that'd be cool. Like Quarians without their suits. But who knows? I mean, if you look at EA, the things that EA is used to are games like action-packed shooters. I mean, that's what they started to do with Mass Effect. They started to make it more of a shooter for the First Contact War. I think that would be a highly based shooter. So I could see it as a smaller individual title. If they were to do that, that'd be interesting. If they make an individual title of the First Contact War and not make it into a trilogy or not make it into a series like they did with Mass Effect. Just like Mass Effect First Contact, something like that. That would be cool. It would be mostly more of a shooter than anything, and I could totally see multiplayer tied to that, like really massively. But I still think that would be interesting. Anyways, I just wanted to share my thought process. I would love to know what you guys think about this. Would you like to see new races? Either way, I would love to play as another race. Even if it's like, no, it's nothing to do with the ancients. I would love to play as another race, because you get to experience that slightly in the multiplayer. I don't know. It's gonna be pretty hard for them to pull that off. But they did it with Dragon Age Origins, so I mean, even if they just give you a few races to choose from, even if it's not like all of them, maybe a Turian, a human, and an Asari. It would be hard for them to make all the races available to you for you to choose from. So I think they would probably, if they ever even did that, I think they would probably have you stick to picking 3 so that they could only focus on 3 storylines. If not, they'd have to focus on a crap ton of storylines, on a Quarian, on a Krogan, on a Solarian, on a human, on a Turian, on a you know, all these different and that would be really hard, and it would be a huge game, and I don't think they'd even go for that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later. Stay tuned for a message from the commander himself.
I'm Commander Shepard, and Gamer MD83 is my favorite channel on YouTube.